All right, so we're gonna talk a bit about stances. This is gonna be part of a stance series. We'll go over the squatting stances, the Oli stances, and we'll also go over some pressing stances and a few things in between. But this first one, let's just go over squatting stances. So the squat stance, when we're talking about it, is a very kind of general place. So when you look at it, we've got our heels generally in line with our shoulders. So the reason for that is we want our heels outside our hips. We'll talk about that when we get into like pressing and whatnot. But the main thing that we're looking to accommodate is range of motion from the hip capsule. So as we go down to the bottom position, we need to be able to give space in the hip to get full range. And this stance can actually be wider or narrower depending on the person, depending on the leg lengths, depending on tightness. There's a lot of things that can kind of go back and forth to make it happen. Now, what you're gonna look at and your eyes are gonna go to as a coach is the feet. When you go to the feet in relation to the hips and shoulders, they should be, like I said, pretty close to in line with the shoulders. That's our jam, that's what we're going for. Now, what it'll look like if it goes too wide, what you tend to see is in the bottom, their knees will start to cave. So they get to the bottom and no matter how they push their knees out, they won't be able to keep them out over the toe. But that variance is pretty wide. There are people who can take a really wide stance with really long legs and you're like, wow, that looks too wide. You watch them squat and that knee tracks the toe and you're like, okay. Now on the other end of the spectrum, what we have is too narrow. And what you'll see a lot in our community is people who want to take a really narrow stance. I'm not quite sure why, but if you've got looser ankles, and you've got kind of room in the hips, you can get away with a narrower stance and still maintain other points of performance. But what we start to lose as we go a little bit narrower for most of us is it shoves the femur back into the hip and it's hard for us to get range. So for a lot of people, when they take a narrower stance, they go down, it binds, pushes the femur back into the hip and they can't go down any deeper and they're like, I'm having a hard time getting depth. In that case, you can widen their stance up just a little. Now another thing with this is you as a coach always get the right to be like, hey, go a little wider. Hey, go a little narrow. And they're like, this is where you do it. Or this is where I do it. You can say, no, it's not. Not today. Let's try a little bit wider, a little bit narrower. And just have your reasons for it. A wider stance usually accommodates more range. A narrower stance, you could make the argument that a narrower stance would have more power because you're more pressing straight down into the ground versus slightly wider, but that doesn't really come into play in the squatting movements. It more comes into play in the pressing movements, the more dynamic movements, which we'll get into in the other stances. So again, we've got our stance. It starts heels pretty under the shoulders, and then we can go a little bit wider to accommodate maybe a little bit more range, something from the hips, get it in there, or a little bit narrower if somebody has extra flexibility in their ankles and their hips. The biggest guider for stance is can they hit the points of performance, period. So if they can hit the points of performance, all of them, weight in the heels, knees track toes, full range of motion to the hip, back staying nice and flat, then we can be like, cool, that stance works for you. And some people have a really wide range of where this can happen. They'll be like, I can do that here, or I can do that here, and it'll look good in all those places. So we actually get the freedom to be like, cool, man, well, let's try a couple different out. Let's see if any points of performance start to fail. And if they do, we can go narrower or wider and just adjust from there. There's a wide range. Make sure those points of performance are hit. That's why you would take a wider or narrower in the squatting positions.
Thank you for watching, and if you found that helpful and you want more of this kind of content, we have literally hundreds of videos just like this, from practical tips and tricks to theory to everything in between, all in the knowledge. And if you want to learn from me directly and our cohort of level 4 staff members, then we also have the Knowledge Pro, which we do weekly calls and live interaction and homework and everything else in between. If you want any more information or would like to have a free trial of the knowledge, please click the link in the description below and get after it.